You know, one of the things you learn in politics and in life is that you deal with what you get. So, as you can see, I want to talk about framing for political change. It's a vital part of politics, it's a vital part of life, it's a vital part of any kind of engagement with others. So what I thought I would do, I'm going to probably, because of the sake of time, oh my God, I'm leaking. One of my favorite pens just tattooed me.
Do you need a paper towel or something?
You know what? As long as nobody judges me at dinner for having purple fingers, I think I'll be okay. So we did the introductions. I'm going to talk about what is framing, what is constructivism and how framing fits in it, kinds of frames, the biases that are in framing, and as we'll see, they're naturally biased. Who frames, and what you'll see is all of us frame. Do they change, and how they change, and why it matters. So I think first of all, politics, as I see it, is built, we call it constructed, and part of that is through ideas and the communication of ideas and the communication of solutions. And so what we can see here is that framing advances political change, but it can also act as resistance, right? So political, you'll see in each of your worlds, leaders kind of compete with these frames. And some win for a short time, others win for another time. But we do this for several reasons. Mostly it's persuasion. Not always members of the public. It can be people in an institution like MOPA. You might want to persuade people to create a program like MOPA, and part of that is in the framing. To win office, to pass policy, and this was something that I dealt with. How do you pass policy? How do you pass policy that matters? How do you pass policy that's really complex? To make or prevent political change, to win court cases. So much of what goes on in a courtroom is about framing. And how do you frame the issue in a way that it resonates for people? And then finally, journalists frame in order to tell a story in a compelling way. And when they tell a story in a compelling way, then people read the articles and they get something from it. So, what is a frame? Oops, I didn't want you to get that one yet. Anybody have a thought about what a frame is? You can even think of it as a picture frame. Any thoughts? Yes.
It's a type of lens. It's a type of lens you use to understand reality.
That's exactly right. Anything you want to add to that?
That's exactly right.
That's exactly right. So this is one definition. It's kind of like a storyline or a theme. Oh, that's wonderful, Corey. Thank you.
It's broken.
Oh, never mind.
Sorry.
I retract my thanks.
I just thought the sound, but it'll be fine.
Something.
But the thing is that frames, I mean, they tell you what the thing is that we're talking about is, but without them, we deal with like a morass of information, right? It's like, how do you understand something? So they focus us, they include some information, they take some information out, and by doing so, you're naturally dealing with a bias. So no matter what, your frames are biased. And they're biased around these stories that you're telling, what you include, what you exclude. Two main types of frames, and this kind of gets to the heart of it, I think. And by the way, I'm going to call this a visual frame, but you can think of it conceptually too. So what do you think's wrong with this kid? We're really focused on him in this frame. Any idea what happened? He's lost.
He's upset with his mom or his...
Mom? Well, what if I change the frame? You get a different story. Now, suppose I took this and I moved it all the way over here. You get a whole completely different idea. Here's another one that I think was What's going on with him? Looks like he's protesting. He does, doesn't he? He's protesting. Anybody else?
He looks hot.
He does look hot. He's sweating, isn't he?
This is a soccer game.
Could be celebrating something.
Could be celebrating. Now again, imagine that I took this. But what if he wasn't even in the picture and I focused on this guy? It tells a completely different story. So this is kind of, I call it visual framing, but it really applies to everything. This is a little more of an abstract example, and it's a little antiquated, but stay with me. I know you guys haven't even seen these because you're so young. But the idea here is, can you imagine reading a dictionary? What would you retain if you tried to read a dictionary? What would you this is like information without a really good frame. And what I do, by the way, I'm just kind of, sometimes I'm all over the place. Similarly, a phone book, right? I mean, what are you gonna, you might look something, I know you guys never seen a phone book. You're like, what's a phone book? But I thought it was a good example anyway. So, now I take parts of this dictionary and I turn it into something that has meaning. And this is powerful, right? Now I pulled these from all different parts of the dictionary, and I'm not actually not even sure the Taliban was in the dictionary, but I imagine it is in the internet version. And now what about the phone book? How can I do this? How can I make this meaningful so that people can actually take something away from the phone book? Now I've framed it into something that is useful. I pulled things from all over the place. I actually don't know where that is. It's just a picture of a map. You know, this is awful that I never look at my notes, and so I have no idea where we are. Oh, now I know where we are. And this is what my house looks like. Now you guys know this one. This is much more like your... Okay, so Wikipedia is kind of a quasi-frame. It's organized, and it's organized in a particular way, but it's not like a full frame that tells a story. Now I pulled this one out because there's something going on with this list of American novels. So I'm going to give you a frame that was used about this frame, a frame of the quasi-frame. Oh, by the way, here's the list of the American novelists. So the editors started separating out the female from the American novelists, and the New York Times called it sexism. That's a meaningful frame. And here's a frame of the frame of the frame. This is Salon. So is Wikipedia sexist? The bad behavior appeared to be the work of a single misguided editor. What happened? And so you see kind of what happens when the framing starts to add on to itself. Okay, that's this page now. I'll see if I can keep up with myself. Who remembers what happened in Gaza last year? What happened?
A lot, specifically.
Like there was a lot of drama at a certain point. Do you remember what happened? Anybody remember? November, December of last year? All right, so I'm going to give you some headlines, because headlines are really good frames. You remember this? Now let me ask you some questions. Is there a bad guy here? Does this word tell us something? And what about this word? What does it tell us? It tells us that these people are militants, and they are not just sending a rocket, but they are renewing rockets. So there's kind of a bad guy, and there's probably a victim. Now, Haaretz is a newspaper that is in Israel, and it tends to be, believe it or not, progressive. Oops, those are supposed to be separate. Don't look at this one. Okay. Israeli bombardment of Gaza enters 5th day. Now who's the bad guy in this one?
The Israelis.
Yeah. So here we've got the Gazans, here we've got the Israelis, and here again it's bombardment. The 5th day. They're relentless. Now who's the bad guy in this one?
The U.S.
The U.S. Same incident. 3 different frames. Now imagine, what if you only read this paper? You'd have an idea about these Gazans and about what caused this problem, right? Or if you only got this one, and you'd miss the complexity of the real situation. And can we ever have a peace process in the Middle East if all you're doing is reading this and only reading this? Pretty hard. So that's one of the things that goes on is this battlefield of frames as political maneuvering, as political power, but sometimes it leads to more trouble rather than solutions. So, as I said, frames are naturally biased, right? But there are some common biases. One of them is information omissions. One is commission. One of them is distortion. Distortion is kind of from the emphasis usually placed. What is the story we're trying to tell? I'm going to start with omissions. So I searched really hard to get some gun control headlines, gun debate headlines, and I got to tell you, it has been squeezed out by the Boston bombing. There's hardly anything. And that's a whole other subject that I'd like to talk to you guys about another time, which is how the media behave in the agenda setting function. But we don't do that today. Just a little teaser, you know how we do that. Stay tuned. Next time, agenda setting. So support for new gun control law falls below 50%. How about this one? For senator, Bill's defeat is personal and political. What do we know about guns so far? Gun control showdown set in Senate. Now these are very common frames in mass media. And we'll talk about those in just a second. But what's missing? And by the way, I read these articles, and there's not much more substance than this. How about this? That's a lot of people dying from guns. But is anybody talking about that? That's a bias of omission. And here, if you want to go beyond children, I just found this for 1 year. And how many were killed in 9/11? 3,000. So in 1 year, we had 31,000 gun deaths. And nobody knows that. That's a framing omission. And you can see the bias that comes from that. Commission, I just thought I'd use one that just happened quickly, and it's a complete commission. Yes?
Do you mind explaining information commission?
Commission is sort of like creating something, right? So it could be a complete fabrication, like in the case of, do you guys remember this? So there were hackers that hacked into the AP account and they sent this out. Do you guys know what happened when this went out? Before they realized the hacking had happened?
Stock market.
Woo-hoo!
Yeah.
It's like 130 points. The Dow fell from this. And then what happened? This is an example of a media effect, by the way. Stay tuned, next time, media effects. Information distortion, I've got 2 examples of this. Really? And how do you know? Are you following this guy around? What's he doing? He's preventing us from calling evil by its name. Or is that really the beginning of homegrown terror threats? Really? you'll notice the emotion in this too. One of the things I'm going to talk about is emotion. This is in the British paper. So, again, very different. Oh look, I left the date out of this. Same week. Very different approach, right? Here's another one. This is from 2009. This was in my book, so I felt like I had to do it. Climate Gate, follow the money. What does that tell you? What does Climate Gate really connect you to?
Scandal.
Scandal because of
Watergate.
Watergate. Oh my God, it's a scandal. Follow the money. It's a green swindle. Even CNN. Do you remember what happened that created this? Or these hacked emails? There's these scientists that were involved in a global climate change report. Somebody hacked into their emails and took one little line that one of the scientists had sent to the other. And he was concerned that if somebody looks at the tree ring, which is one measurement of climate change, that they're going to think that the warming hasn't happened. So he's saying there's a little statistical trick we can use to try to help people understand what's really going on with climate change. But they took this word statistical trick, and every newspaper jumped on it in 2009 in the US. Not in the Guardian, and not in the Telegraph. Oh, this was, by the way, this was later. So when they finally did an investigation, they vindicated the scientists. They said, was there any kind of hanky-panky? But by the way, when all this was coming out in 2009, and this was like the dominant narrative that was in the US, people's understanding about climate change plummeted. And they started to doubt science, and they started to doubt scientists. They became very, very skeptical about this. I'm going to keep my eye on the time here. Anybody have any questions about this so far? You think about how this might apply to what you're doing, especially homelessness. I think the gun one applies to the homelessness issue, right? Let's not get them out there. Mm-hmm. What's your take on this? I'll call on you.
Okay. I mean, I guess the thing that I keep coming back to, thinking about this, is that really everything is a frame. Every issue has a frame. So when you say, even CNN is doing it, that's a frame, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just, I guess just the idea that it's really pervasive. So there are some places that maybe you come to expect, and you say, like, Fox News, like, they're framing this issue for me. But it's everywhere.
It is everywhere. The question is, how do you make a frame that is both persuasive and as accurate as you can and as true to reality as you can? Now, when you go back to this and you go, even CNN, I mean, Trick or Truth? Really?
Mm-hmm.
You know, why would they do that? We'll talk about some of that a little bit here in a second, too. Did you want to add anything to the homelessness debate?
No, I guess my thing is, I really don't trust CNN anyway as a source, first of all. So I tend to listen to NPR or...
But even NPR.
I know, but I just find them
Yeah.
probably a lot more truthful.
Right.
I don't know if that's even a good way to frame it.
Well, no, I mean,
But-
in part of the point is not necessarily, I mean, the media clearly have a different kind of, each of them have a separate kind of goal than like what we have, either as, professors, or as you guys have, is out there in the world trying to make a difference. We all have different goals, and so we all use different frames to try to effectuate those goals. And especially the media like the CNN or the Fox News, their goals are even very different from the Guardian. Completely different structure, completely different mission, and it affects the content. So this goes back to what we were saying. Frames. Right? We all do. So public officials, they're constantly framing. Advocates, and it's kind of a battle of the frames, right? What ideas win out? How do you communicate or articulate in a way that your idea stays pure and is yet persuasive? Members of the public and journalists, right? All with different goals. So, political leaders. I pulled this off of Obama's site. Now, you're looking at this and you're going, okay, who's the good guy? This happens in the frames a lot. Who's the hero? And who's the bad guy? Right? So now if we keep going, we go, oh, well, here's his initiatives. You don't have to read these, by the way. I just wanted you to see that this would, and by the way, there's only 10 of what he had on his site, and I abbreviated them. He really needs a lesson in framing on these. This is like me, like cutting them in half. But you know, he looks like he's trying to do things, and he's trying to be persuasive on his website that he's the good guy, and he's blocking these congressional mean people who are trying to ruin the economy. Well, here's Boehner's take. So now he's the good guy. And you know what? It gets worse. You know, the bad news is they probably both believe it. And they're probably both persuaded that they're doing the right thing on some level. All right, so one more. We're staying on the economy for just a second. Let's look at the members of the public and advocates. Ooh. How mean is he? He's ruining everything. I ran out of papers. What a mess you guys have made. Look at what you've done. What happened to the rest of my notes? Okay, well then I have to wing the rest of it. I know they were here to start with. All right, so that's the wrong one. So media frames. Where do you guess media frames come from? Yes.
What journalists think will generate the most interest?
I do think that's a big part of it. He said what journalists think will generate the most interest. But there's a step even before that.
Is it what, like the public? Do they poll public opinion on things?
I do think it, and that goes exactly with your calling, right? Yeah.
What about their own personal lives?
Absolutely. All of that comes into play. And then there's one more step. Oops, sorry, there. They come from the leaders. So these filters are exactly what you said. It's their personal experiences, it's their personal biases, it's their personal histories, it's what they think the public wants, it's what they think is going to generate interest. And there's another thing, which is about the goals of journalism itself. Some of that is, you know, if you look 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it was about trying to be objective, it's trying to be neutral. That's changed. And historically, by the way, the very first American papers were very biased. They were connected to political parties. Then it became neutral to sell ads, and then it started to become partisan again. But so here's what happens. So something happens, or a policy is going on, and leader one says, you know, my policies are, you know, going to fix the economy. Leader number two says, no, his policies are ruining the economy. And what does the journalist do? It's the most common frame out there. He said this, and she said that. Or he said, in the case of both. So they spit out media frames. And they're not exactly the same, but they're really awfully close often. Sometimes they're opposite sides, but still telling the same story, which is he said, she said. And then, of course, we have alternative frames getting out through the internet, through public talks, through all kinds of things. So what are the common frames? So the first one I mentioned, he said, she said. What does that tell anybody? It tells people there are two sides, which is probably a lie in the first place. First of all, there's probably 5 or 10, or sometimes there's 1. Like in the case of climate change, there was really mostly 1, where like 98% of the scientists understood climate change, had done the research on it, had shown how it was tied to the activities of us, all of us together. And then there were scientists, in quotes, because they weren't climate scientists, who occupied about 2%, who just wanted to generate data. So in this case, it biased because there weren't really 2 opposing sides that were equal. There was one primary side, and then these other guys who were mostly on the industry payroll. And then sometimes it reduces the complexity of an issue with 2 opposing sides, right? This is another very biased frame. And you know, I study war and peacemaking in addition to American politics. And what you'll notice is, even suppose you're at a ball game. Everybody is watching their team, everybody's getting along, and a fight breaks out in this corner. What's going to get covered? That 95% of people had a great time, or that 2 people had a fight. But what happens when you focus on the fight? You start thinking, oh my God, it's a disaster. Oh my God, there's conflict everywhere. So that's one of the biases that comes from that one. This one, by the way, I named this one. Blame frames is mine. I coined it. Political problems are complex. No one person or group created them. But what you find in frames frequently is, it's his fault. It's her fault. It's their fault. And this is particularly true in war and genocide, where you just blame one side for all the problems that are right there. But it really messes up people's understandings and affects what's possible in the next step. This too, us versus them. And by the way, the more us and the more them that we emphasize, how do you ever have a big tent? Republicans versus Democrats. Americans versus Taliban. And I argue that we probably have more in common, really, if we get down to it. If we really sat down and made a list of everything that we disagree on and everything that we agree on, I think that there would be far more that we agree on than disagree on. But we don't see it that way. And that's just a natural outcome of a biased frame. So you saw those gun headlines? And it was all about whether the policy was going to make it. It was personal or it was a professional win that Dianne Feinstein had to get. It didn't tell us anything about the substance of the policy. It told us who was winning and who was losing. It's not very informative for a democratic society. But it's a very common journalism frame. And then this one, of course, it's ClimateGate. And there are probably more. I don't know if I have any more because I messed up my notes so badly. A few of you guys do. You sit there, you're attentive, you're nice, and it messes me up. That was a blame frame, by the way. I started trying one out in the class. Oh, and the crisis. And just like you guys said, it's like we focus on these things because we think it'll keep the eyeballs, and everybody wants ratings, everybody wants to succeed. This is one of the things that we deal with in every profession, is we want to be successful, and we want to be appreciated, and we think this is the way to go as journalists. And to some extent it works. I don't know that it works permanently. Okay. You guys are too young to remember this, except for Ron. You might remember this, right? Anybody remember 2004 election?
Yeah, I think I was alive.
So there was like this huge Republican, they took the presidency, They took so many Congress seats. It was like this wave. And they blamed your mayor.
Oh, yeah.
Now you remember, don't you? Because he started marrying people, same-sex marriage. And then, even the New York Times, what is it? So, you know, even though they look like it's kind of neutral, what does it really say? It says something is not moral. In this very neutral, unbiased, in quotes, publication. And I do think the New York Times tries really hard, and I think most of the time they're pretty good, even though they let us into the Iraq War from sins of commission. And here's another one. I thought you guys would appreciate this since you're in San Francisco. Your guy got the GOP in votes. So those of you who are Republicans should be happy. Those of you who are not should be upset. So look at the consistency here. Now this creates what we call a meta-frame. And when it's repeated and it's said over and over again, it starts to become as if it's true, right? Everybody's like, oh, I guess, you know, it's a bad thing. Now we're back to the horse race. Who's next? Almost like they're excited about it. Even Fox News. I mean, they're not cheering it on in the same way that CNN seems to be, but they've certainly stepped away from that moral correctness or incorrectness argument. Now, how about this one? Now, does this shock you? Nine years. That's a frame change. It's a major frame change. If we had more time, I would talk about how that happens. There's so much more. I just really could go. Yes, you have a question.
I just find it interesting that even the focus on who even started it, we've already forgotten
Right.
at this point.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. It is. Last thing I want to get into is the effects. Some of the effects and some of the most deleterious effects when frames are very bad. And if you'll forgive me, I'm going to take you into an international conflict. I know we're mostly focused on American politics here. But I'm first going to talk about, why framing matters and how they work. And then I'm going to give you a really awful example of the worst possible kind of frame and contrast it with something completely different. So we talked about how it generates meanings, right? And one of the meanings that you see pretty frequently is how unfair something is. The haves, the have-nots, but it's always like, oh, well, he doesn't deserve because he doesn't. That's a frame. Whatever that is. Sometimes there may be some truth to it, sometimes there isn't. It's persuasive, but this is something, if you remember the fear part earlier, I said remember this because we're going to go back to it. Certain emotions get activated by the meanings. And emotions are not only powerful, but they're automatic. They're automatic. It's not like you think about them, they just come up. And then this is something that I noticed it because I studied conflict and international conflict, but you see it here too. You reinforce these groups as if we're separate, as if we're so different, Republicans, Democrats, and it's become more different over time for sure. But it activates a group-based psychology that I'm going to talk about, which is not particularly healthy. All of these sort of stimulate a particular kind of behavior. And when you have mass behavior, you have change. So, remember this? Everybody know who the KKK is? Does anybody not know? Okay. This was actually a fairly recent experiment with the KKK who had proposed to do a rally. And there was a debate about whether or not they should be able to do a rally. And these communication scholars used two frames to test if it would make a difference with these two frames. One of them was a public safety frame. One of them was a free speech frame. So one group heard an argument that the KKK had a right to their free speech, and this rally was part of their right to free speech. The other group got a frame about, oh, this is a public safety issue. And you know, if it goes on, we've got a lot of concerns about what could happen. Same organization with the same history, same rally, two frames. Guess what happened? I'm not going to tell you on this. It's just I wanted to get through the slide. What happened? Just try it on yourself.
Public safety one.
The people who got the public safety frame were like, we don't really want the rally. People who got the free speech frame, whether they dislike the organization and everything it ever stood for, were like, well, they have a right. We support them to have their rally. Public safety? No, not so much. Some change. That's the power. Okay, why emotions matter. We talked just briefly about this, but I'm going to just give you a few emotions. Sake of time. Meanings generate emotions, generate behaviors. It's automatic and it's unconscious. So when somebody tells you there's homegrown terror and it's in your backyard, there's kind of an automatic fear. And imagine it's really close to you. What if you were in Boston? Imagine you lived in Northern Ireland and the IRA was blowing up a building. It's automatic distance or attack, right? And every emotion has an automatic action tendency. So if it's anger, it's attack it, fix it. If it's hate, it's destroy it. And some of the frames that you hear in some of the media generate hate, even here. Resentment is a big one you see all the time. It's unfair, they got this, they didn't work for it, they snuck over the border, or whatever it is. Generates resentment and makes you want to punish. Doesn't mean you automatically punish, by the way. Because emotions come up, they're a tendency, an action tendency, but they don't necessarily result in an action. And then I had to end on a positive note with love and embrace. I don't mean to end the whole talk, but I didn't want to leave you with hatred and resentment.
Thank you.
Now, can I go into a little after 5? Is that okay? A little after
Yeah.
5? Okay. Yes, good. Because this is really important. So, I'm just going to put these up here, get through them really fast, and I might even skip, oops, go back. I'm going to talk about each one just really quickly. Anybody heard of the Rattlers and the Eagles? It's kind of an obscure experiment that they did a long time ago, but this speaks to the power of what happens in group psychology. So this group of social psychologists, they took a bunch of teenaged boys, all the same age, all the same ethnicity, all the same religion. Nothing distinguished one from the other. But they randomly assign them to groups. You're an eagle, you're a rattler, you're an eagle, you're a rattler. And then they create a little game, some competition. And guess what happened? The rattlers accused the eagles of cheating. The eagles did the same to the rattlers. They started to degrade the other side. It was a random assignment of groups. There's also a lot of research on intergroup emotions. So when one of your own group gets hurt, you feel the emotions for them. You might have never even met them. you know, I'm Armenian, and so, you know, we have this Armenian genocide in our history, and my family was personally affected, but every year when I hear about something going on in Armenia, I'm like, I've never even met that person, but oh, my heart. Stanford Prison Experiment, do you guys know this? That was right around here. Same kind of idea where random assignment, prison guards, prisoners, all, by the way, like I think the students were mostly peace activists. They started acting mean and brutal and abusive to their colleagues, and they started acting like prisoners, victims. Random assignment. These three are really about conformity. If I were to put one of you outside the room and tell the rest of the room that when she comes in, I'm going to put this thing on the blackboard and put a ruler up there, and we're going to ask her to judge this line. It is obviously 6 feet long. You're out of the room. You don't know this. There's a ruler, there's a 6 foot line, and every rest of you say it's 8 feet. This really happened. She comes back in the room, and we're having this discussion, and go, how long is that? Guess what happened? She's like, everybody's going, oh, it's 8 feet, it's 8 feet. She's going, well, I think it's 6 feet. I'm not going to say it. Everybody agrees that it's 8 feet. There must be something wrong here. What am I not seeing? Similarly, with groupthink, that's kind of what goes on with groupthink. And then social laws are something completely different. You know how, like, when there's state laws, you sometimes violate them? Like you might speed. You might even have a beer before you get in the car. You might risk violating some state laws. Social laws are different. We don't violate those. Can you imagine seeing your colleague walk in with a pink skirt? Would you ever wear a pink skirt?
Oh yeah.
Oh, come on. Would you? Okay, never mind.
No, I'm just kidding. I won't.
Yeah, because what happens? You can't violate social laws. So this is kind of what happens when you get a meta frame, right? People start conforming to it. I'm almost out of time here. I'm going to tell you a disaster story. I'm going to take you into international, where all of this comes into play. And this was one of the first studies I did in mass media. Anybody know what happened in the Rwandan genocide? Oh, I'm supposed to skip this up. Should I do this? Yeah, let's do it really fast, because this will go right into Rwanda. So is this what happens when you spill your papers? So here comes this frame. If it becomes a meta frame, it develops these meanings and beliefs and cultural norms. And then you get these, you know, those guys over there are bad guys. You know, they are morally not right, or they are stealing from society, or they don't belong here, or whatever that is, generates a certain kind of behavior. Here in the US, we see people talking about, oh, they don't deserve those civil rights. In other places, it might go so far as, oh, they should be isolated and killed. But even here in the US, what about Guantanamo? Well, we don't think about these prisoners who've been in there for 10 years. We think they're just bad people who deserve to be there. Never had a trial. I know at least one of them, there's no evidence at all whatsoever that he ever did anything. Maybe he did. But people are supporting from this meta frame. It reinforces this idea, and then it keeps generating the frame, and the cycle continues. Now I finally get to my horror story. I call dangerous frames, deadly frames. Yeah. Now, Rwanda is different from the US. They had one primary media. It was a radio station. It was privately held. They didn't have a large reading society. They didn't have multiple frames coming in. but it's kind of an example of what can happen and how powerful frames can be when they're repeated, they're homogeneous, and they, people start to buy them. 800,000 people were killed often by their own family, their friends, doctors killing patients, teachers killing students. Why? It wasn't all the framing in this one radio station. There was some organizing going on the ground. There were some circumstances that led to people's beliefs. But this radio station that everybody listened to because it was so hip and so interesting and had great music and had great jokes and commentary, started using blame frames against one ethnic group and generated hate, calling them subhuman, calling them cockroaches, accusing them of coming to genocide us. And if you don't kill them first, they're going to come kill you. And besides that, you know what else? If we get rid of them all, we'll make the country beautiful and clean, and we'll have a democracy. Literally, I read the transcripts. These are some of the things that happened. And it was persuasive for a lot of people. Not everybody buys a metaframe. Now, I want to contrast that with Burundi. Used to be one country, same two ethnic groups, same history, power structure slightly different, same colonial past. Rwanda goes into a genocidal situation. Burundi escapes genocide and starts moving towards a peace process. Part of what happened is that when people saw what happened in Rwanda, some NGOs went in and they set up a media to try to dispel these hate frames and genocidal frames. They created this radio program where one person from each ethnic group had to report together and agree on not just the information but the frames. So they're killing each other, right? Before. So now they're reporting together and trying to change the frame into a way. Not who's to blame, not who's a bad guy, not us versus them, which was a construction in the first place. It wasn't real, it wasn't true. It was created by somebody. But what was the cause of conflict? What do we have in common? Not what separates us. How do we resolve the conflict? And then we saw some meanings starting to change. And this is the most profound one. I'm going to leave you with this and wrap up. Before they did this media, if a Hutu, which was one ethnic group, rescued a Tutsi, the other ethnic group, a member of a Tutsi group, he'd be marked as a traitor and killed by his own people. So they had this radio program talking about this. And they started to talk about these people as if they weren't traitors, but maybe they were heroes. And guess what happened? People would start calling in. They anonymously confess, yeah, I rescued somebody from the other side. And it started to build a critical mass. And more people not only started confessing, but rescuing more and more and more. And it changed the meaning completely. And framing is about meaning. And it changed the emotion because it changed the meaning. And it changed the behavior. And I know most of what we're doing is American politics, but I thought this is such a profound example of how a frame change can change politics. There's not that much. I'll just throw a concluding slide up here. We're skipping all this because I talked about it. But this is the takeaway. I think it's just talk about what normal entrepreneurs are, but I think you have a sense. These are people who try to change the meaning, try to change the norm. And it happens on all levels. So framing happens everyday life, in every level of politics. It affects our understandings. our understandings affect our psychology, and our psychology affects our behavior, and mass behavior affects what's next in politics. As it changes one way, it can always change the other way. So thank you. Any questions?
It's time for one.
Yeah. Sorry, I ran the whole time.
Do you have any?
I did have one about the Rwanda. The frame did change and it may be getting better, but there's still a cycle going on about
In Burundi?
in Rwanda.
Right. I actually stopped at the genocide in Rwanda, but you're right. You're right. Absolutely.
Yeah, because the prisoners are being, because a lot of the people who were doing the killing, they were put in prison, and by the time they finished the time, they were put back into prison for another crime that they did in the genocide.
Right.
So it's just become a struggle, and I actually work with the organization, someone who went to Rwanda, and they said we need to figure out how to break that cycle.
Absolutely. And that is extraordinarily hard, breaking a cycle. But yes, you're absolutely right. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm going to take you to I think that's the conference room, and then you guys can fill these out. If you want that.
I'm not a Mac girl.
I go ahead and set that.
Look at this.
Is that presentation, would it be a whole class? So is that just like a little bit of a whole class?
You know,
Or
it
is it
probably
just-
would be. Depends on the class. I mean, I went on for almost an hour, probably 40 minutes, but ideally, I think what I would want is to have a little bit more interaction, and if we all knew each other better, it'd be easier to do that.
I meant, would it be a course?
Oh, a
Like-
framing course?
Yes.
No, I would probably mix it in within a few other kinds of, especially like media effects and gender setting